Hello and welcome to today's video. This one's been a long time coming. Today I'm finally going to talk about nervous system retraining programs. So what are nervous system retraining programs? There are a couple of examples. You've got things like DNRS, Gupta, Primal Trust. There are several faith-based neural retraining programs as well. There's a lot out there nowadays. And the goal of a neural retraining program is to try to heal dysregulation in the nervous system that can cause health problems. So one example of this, I'm going to explain to you because this is one of the contexts where this actually works really well, because I certainly think that nervous system retraining programs have a place. However, I see them overprescribed, over-recommended, and people expecting miracles out of them or even using them in a way that ends up hurting themselves. And I really don't want you to spend money on something or to invest a lot of time and energy and resources into something that actually ends up hurting you, even though you're actively doing it in the name of healing. So one way that we can think about this, one example I can give you when neural retraining is actually extremely helpful is for certain types of chronic pain. So in this example, we have a gentleman that had an injury to his back. Doesn't really matter what the injury was. Imagine it's like a slipped disc or something that caused some chronic pain. Well, let's say acute pain that turned into chronic pain. And in the acute pain phase, there was an observable injury. For example, you could have done an X-ray or an MRI or something, and you would have seen that there was structural damage. In this stage initially, let's say the 6 to 8 weeks where there's actually an injury, there's actually inflammation, there is really a problem. If you were to try to use a brain retraining program, you're literally trying to gaslight yourself. You're trying to convince yourself using neural feedback that the pain isn't real or that the inflammation isn't real, when it actually is. I'm just sharing this now. We're going to go into this in even more detail in a moment. But if you were to use it during this acute phase where there is actually a trigger, there is actually a structural problem, this is when a neural retraining program would be extremely harmful and should not be used. However, let's say that this gentleman rested very well. We get 12 weeks in. He's been doing physiotherapy. He's been doing rehab. He's at the point now where he's even starting to do things like deadlifts. He's doing squats. He's realized that there was a weakness in his back, which is why he had that injury. And now he's working through training it. And through this training, he's still having chronic back pain. However, if you look at an X-ray or you look at an MRI, everything's fixed. There is no problem. The biomechanics are good. The physiotherapists, the osteopaths, they're all saying this should be working fine. There is mechanically no dysfunction here anymore. At this point, this is where we need a neural retraining intervention. So there's been some really interesting research into chronic pain, and something that can happen when we have an acute injury or we have feedback from our body to our brain that something is wrong, the brain can actually get stuck. And even once that cause of the problem that was giving that feedback to the brain has been resolved, the brain can get stuck in this loop where it's still perceiving pain even though there's actually nothing there. And in this case, instead of the injury in the back relaying through the nervous system to the brain to experience pain, the nervous system is experiencing pain and it's relaying it down the nervous system to the point where the injury originally was, even though there's no injury anymore. I really like this example because it's very tangible. It's very easy to talk about because it's black and white. There is this obvious injury and then there's this obvious recovery. However, the place that nervous system retraining programs tend to actually be used is less black and white. There's a lot more of a gray area, and this is where it gets really tricky. And this is where I see a lot of people doing it wrong. So for context, the place that we want to use a nervous system retraining program is once the actual injury or the original root cause has been completely addressed, and all that's lingering is a dysfunctional neural pathway. In the context of the example, that neural pathway would be chronic pain, but this could be anything. This could be chronic symptoms. This is especially true of digestive problems, but this also could be something connected to, say, for example, PTSD or even an addiction. Imagine if an addiction was developed as a coping mechanism to survive a certain environment, but then we have left that environment. The coping method is no longer actually required, but the neural pathway is stuck. There is no environment that needs to be adapted to. You're actually in a completely healthy environment, but because the brain has wired that way, the addiction sticks. So it's really important you can understand how we have to make sure we're out of the environment first. If you've developed an addiction as a coping mechanism to a bad environment and you stay in that toxic environment, but then you're trying to neural retrain your way out of it, you haven't actually addressed the root cause of the problem. You're skipping steps and it actually becomes a tool of self-harm. If you're experiencing chronic pain in your back and there's actually a physiological structural problem and you're using a neural retraining program to try to convince yourself that that pain isn't real, you're creating an enormously significant problem. Now, the place that I see this used most is with chronic digestive problems, with environmental toxicity, so things like multiple chemical sensitivity, mold illness, anytime there's some sort of environmental pollutant. And the place I see this the most is like YouTube, in the comments section, in Facebook groups, on on Instagram and social media, you hear of so many people saying, I healed mold. Finally, my last step was I had to do neural retraining, or I healed my chemical sensitivity. I had to do the neural retraining. Or even for me, in a way, I did a form of neural retraining. I didn't use any of these formal programs that are called neural retraining programs. However, I did a lot of therapy. I also did a lot of meditation and somatic awareness exercises and used psilocybin. All of these things did the same effect. And I actually prefer the way that I did it to these kind of neural retraining programs that you see. But we'll get to that in just a moment. So I want you to just really think about this. If you have a digestive problem, you have a microbiome imbalance, or you have chemical sensitivity, as in your body is reacting to contaminants in the environment because there is a physiological inability to process them. There is no way that you can retrain yourself out of that. It's like trying to use your mind or your positive thinking. Basically, that's what it comes to. It's using positive thinking to try to deny reality. And I'm all for positive thinking. I'm all for, like, I can't even believe I'm saying this because I used to be the most logical person on earth, but I'm all for that woo-woo side of healing now. Like, I'm into the spirituality, I'm into emotions and vibrations, and I even do bioresonance, which is like an energy healing modality. Like, I never thought that that would be me. So I'm definitely not knocking the woo-woo side of things. There's definitely something to it. However, you cannot good vibes your way past reality. A really good example of this would be endotoxin. If you take happy, healthy individuals and you inject them with endotoxin, this is something that comes from the digestive system if you have a gut dysbiosis, if you have like SIBO or leaky gut, SIFO, mold colonization, any kind of imbalance in your microflora, there's a good likelihood that you're having an increased exposure to endotoxin. Take healthy people, inject them with endotoxin. Every single one will develop chemical depression. There's nothing you could do about it. You can't positive thinking. You can't good vibes your way out of that. There is a physiological molecule in the body that is creating inflammation that causes depression. This is so well studied and documented that this is actually the mechanism that they use to test antidepressant efficacy. They inject people or mice with endotoxin and then they give them an antidepressant to see if it works. It literally drives me insane, the amount of people that message me or email me or talk to me and say, I'm still living in a moldy house. I'm still living in the exact same environment that caused me to get sick, but I'm doing this neural retraining program and I think that this is going to be what changes my life. And I disagree every single time, because even though neural retraining and doing therapy and all those other things are profoundly healing and essential parts of the healing process, you cannot bypass physical reality with good vibes. If you manage to completely leave the moldy environment, you get to a completely safe location, you do all of the physiological stuff to support your body's ability to detox mold. I have a bunch of videos about that. If you haven't seen them already, why have you not gone and looked at them? If you don't replace the gut flora that is killed by the mold, if you don't support your bile flow, if you don't support methylation, if you aren't having daily bowel movements, if you're not supporting your body to function and to address these dysfunctions that are caused by, in this case, mold, but whatever root cause factor you have, you're basically using neural retraining as spiritual bypassing. You're literally just trying to good vibes and positive think your way out of a situation that actually needs to be addressed on this physical plane, in this physical reality. But let's say you are in an environment that is completely safe. We've addressed every dysfunction. Gut's working well. The microbiome is replaced. All your lab work's coming back. Everything's in perfect range. And I know lab work isn't the best way of measuring things, but I'm using that as an example. Let's say we've really, truly, genuinely, thoroughly addressed every physiological dysfunction. Then your symptoms are still presenting. That is when you need neural retraining. And up until that point, there is so much more harm that you can do than good. But all I ever hear are people saying how amazing it is and how it changed their life. And then they forget that this is the thing they did right at the end, after they did everything, after they stopped the exposures, after they remineralized the body, after they healed the gut, after they did all of these other things. And yes, it's a great tool to get you over the finish line, but you can only take that last step over the finish line if you've done those thousands of steps that get you from the start line to the finish line in the first place. So if you're feeling a little bit personally attacked, or if you feel like I'm kind of calling you out, I'm really sorry to be kind of pooing on your parade, but I really do want you to get the healing outcomes that you're working towards. If you're doing a program like this, you've paid money. These things are a lot of time. They take so much time, an ungodly amount of time. And this is actually one of the main reasons people quit. Is it's ridiculous. It's impossible to sustain this long term. And if you're in an environment that is keeping you sick and you're trying to good vibes your way to healing the whole time, and you're just like meditating 8 hours a day and telling yourself that these symptoms aren't that bad and everything's actually fine, it's not really a surprise that you don't make that much progress towards healing. And I just want you to stop doing that. Like, that's why I'm making the video. I don't want you to get stuck. I want you to keep making progress. So bringing you back to the example at the beginning of this chronic pain in the back. How did this gentleman end up developing a pain-free life? How did he get through this? Well, he didn't actually use a neural retraining program, but But what he did instead was evidence-based belief shifting. This is what I did accidentally through all of the therapy and different modalities that I tried. I changed my belief system. And the way that this man in this example changed his belief system is he was able to do a squat with over 120 kilograms. And at that point, something shifted in his brain. This voice that kept telling him, I'm afraid of getting injured. I'm afraid that we're weak. We're not very strong. What bad thing could happen? It had so much evidence to the contrary. It had so much evidence of, I am strong. I am powerful. Look how much heavy weight I can lift. Look at the hundreds of lifts that I've done up until this point and have never injured myself. At that point, he had developed enough of a new reality, enough evidence that his belief could shift. And as that belief began to shift, so did his chronic pain. So if we apply this back to chronic health problems, if we apply this to mold toxicity or digestive issues, the way that you shift that belief is you build evidence. I didn't have to convince myself that my digestive problems weren't that bad. I got to the point where they weren't that bad and the belief shifted. And as I began to be able to eat foods that used to give me symptoms, that used to give me problems, that used to make me not feel very good, and I could eat those foods and not only not feel bad, but actually feel better, have more energy, more mental clarity, feel good. I started bringing all of this new evidence on board, and eventually that belief began to shift. So if you're using one of these programs and it's working really well for you, great. I have no problem with that. Just make sure that you're not using it as a tool for spiritual bypassing. You're not denying the physical, 3D, tangible world that you live in, and you're using it as a tool in a way that's actually serving you and helping you and giving you the health outcomes that you want. And if you haven't tried it, or maybe it seems a bit like a bit of noise, you hear a lot about it, and maybe after watching this video, you're maybe hesitating, should I really be doing this or not? Instead, I encourage you to look at this belief shifting idea and instead start to ask the questions, what do I believe right now? And what evidence would I need to have? What things would I need to experience in my life for me to change these beliefs? And instead of just trying to use your brain almost like a tool fighting against itself, oh, I have digestive problems. No, I don't. And you're just forcing either way. What if you got to a point where you actually didn't have digestive problems? Would it be that hard to change your belief after that point? Or what if you'd had, so for me personally, I used to be bedbound and disabled. But then after traveling around the world, after being able to walk 20,000 steps a day, after being able to eat food in Asia with all of the spices and all of these different things and actually feel quite okay at the end of the day, that shifted a belief inside of me. And I began to see myself as strong. I began to see myself as healthy. I began to see myself as very resilient. And this isn't something I had to convince myself of. This is something that I had evidence of. And that belief began to shift very naturally. However you feel now after having watched this video, I would be really interested to hear. So please make sure you leave me a comment below. I actually read every single comment that I get. The comments really helped me. And I also have received comments and emails of other people letting me know how a comment that they read on my video really helped them out. So you really have no idea who you might be helping just by sharing your experience. And as always, if you want a hand with anything that we've outlined in today's video, you can always reach out by email, support@williamdickinson.co.uk, and let me know if you have any questions or if you're interested in following up with a consultation. So that's everything from me today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.